Isabella Cruz had learned three brutal truths about survival on the Montana frontier. Pride was a currency she could no longer afford, trust was a weapon that could destroy you, and sometimes the only choice left was between freezing to death or accepting help from a scarred stranger who would teach her the difference between surviving and truly living. But she had no idea that in the next hour, she'd meet a man whose face told stories of violence, whose eyes held secrets deeper than her own, and whose unexpected kindness would either save her soul or destroy everything she thought she knew about love. December 22nd, 1884, and the blizzard that hit Silver Ridge was the kind that swallowed entire families whole and left nothing but ghost stories come spring. The wind howled down Main Street like a pack of starving wolves, driving snow horizontal and turning the small mining town into a labyrinth of white death. Isabella pressed herself deeper into the narrow alley beside Murphy's saloon, her threadbare shawl no match for the Montana cold that had already claimed feeling in three of her fingers. 4 days without food, 5 nights sleeping wherever she could find shelter, and now this nature's final attempt to finish what her brother Diego had started. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd fled Arizona territory to escape one kind of death, only to find another waiting in the Montana snow. The saloon doors burst open, spilling warmth and raucous laughter into the storm. Two men stumbled out, their breath steaming in the frigid air, and Isabella shrank back into the shadows. She'd learned to make herself invisible around drunk men with money in their pockets and violence in their hearts. But drunk men had a way of seeing what they wanted to see. "Well, well," came a voice thick with whiskey and malice. "What have we got here?" Isabella's blood turned to ice as Silas Kane stepped into the alley, his eyes glittering with the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. Behind him, his partner Dutch Morrison grinned like a wolf that had cornered a rabbit. "Little senorita all alone in the cold," Kane said, moving closer. "That ain't safe for a girl like you." Isabella tried to back away, but the brick wall stopped her retreat. "Please," she whispered, though she knew pleading would only make them enjoy it more. "Just leave me be." Kane's laugh was ugly. "Why would I do that? You look like you need help, and I'm a helpful kind of man." His hand reached for her arm. "Got a warm room upstairs. All you got to do is be friendly." "I said no." She said no. The voice came from the shadows, deep and calm, and carrying the kind of authority that made dangerous men think twice. Isabella turned to see a tall figure step into the alley, broad shoulders beneath a heavy coat, a wide-brimmed hat dusted with snow, and eyes like winter steel. But it was the scar that made her breath catch a pale, jagged line that ran from his left temple to his jaw, transforming what might have been handsome face into something harder, more dangerous. Kane's hand dropped from Isabella's arm. "This ain't your business, you stranger." "It is now." The man stepped closer, and Isabella could see the easy way his hand rested near the Colt on his hip. "Lady said no. That should be the end of it." "You don't know what she is," Morrison spat. "Mexican trash, probably a whore anyway." The stranger's voice didn't change, but something in his posture did. "Step away from her, now." Kane's hand moved toward his gun, but the stranger was faster not to draw, just to shift his coat back, revealing the weapon and the practiced ease with which he wore it. "We don't want trouble," Kane said, but his voice had lost its swagger. "Then don't start any." The stranger's eyes never left Kane's face. "Walk away." They did, but Kane spat in the snow first. "This ain't over, Harper." "Harper." Isabella filed the name away as the two men disappeared into the storm. The stranger Nathan Harper turned to her, and Isabella braced for what would come next. In her experience, men who played hero always expected payment. "You hurt?" he asked. Isabella shook her head, not trusting her voice. "When's the last time you ate?" The question hit her like a physical blow. She couldn't remember. 2 days? 3? The hunger had become so constant she'd learned to ignore it. "I'm fine," she lied. Nathan studied her with those winter gray eyes, taking in her threadbare dress, her thin frame, the way she swayed slightly on her feet. Without a word, he shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it around her shoulders. The warmth was overwhelming. Isabella bit back a sob as heat spread through her body for the first time in days. "Name's Nathan Harper," he said quietly. "I own a ranch about an hour outside town." Isabella Cruz. The words slipped out before she could stop them. You got somewhere to go, Miss Cruz. Isabella looked away. She had 50 cents in her pocket and nowhere to spend it. The boarding house wouldn't take Mexican women. The other saloons were worse than Murphy's. And the church, well, the church had already made its position clear. I see, Nathan said, though she hadn't answered. I got a proposition for you. Isabella's stomach clenched. Here it came, the price for his kindness. My ranch needs someone to cook, clean, keep the house running. It's honest work for honest pay. Room, board, and wages? Isabella stared at him. What's the catch? No catch. Just work. I don't believe you. The words came out harsher than she intended, but she'd learned that men always wanted something. Always. Nathan nodded as if he'd expected that. Fair enough, but you're dying out here, Miss Cruz. Pride won't keep you warm. Isabella looked down at her blue-tinged fingers, at the coat that smelled like leather and wood smoke and safety. He was right. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Why? She asked. Why would you help me? Because someone should. His answer was simple, without pretense or hidden meaning. Because you said no to men who wouldn't listen, and you kept your dignity when it would have been easier to give it up. Something in Isabella's chest cracked open, not breaking but the opposite, like ice melting after a long winter. If I come with you, she said carefully, and I don't like the arrangement, I can leave? Of course you can. It's not a prison, Miss Cruz. It's a job. Isabella studied his face, looking for the lie, the cruel smile, the calculating gleam that would give him away. She found none of it, just patience and something that might have been respect. All right, she said finally. I'll come. But as Nathan's wagon rolled out of Silver Ridge into the storm, Isabella pulled his coat tighter around her and tried not to hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what had gotten her into this mess in the first place. She didn't know yet that safety was just the beginning of her story, or that the man sitting beside her carried scars that went far deeper than the one on his face. All she knew was that for the first time since fleeing Arizona, she wasn't facing the night alone. And sometimes that was enough to keep a person breathing until morning came. The Broken Arrow Ranch appeared out of the storm, like something from a dream, or maybe a mirage born of desperation and cold. Isabella Cruz pressed her face to the wagon window, trying to make sense of the shapes emerging from the swirling snow. A two-story house with a wraparound porch sat at the center of it all, smoke curling from the chimney like a promise of warmth. Behind it, she could make out the dark bulk of a barn, several outbuildings, and what looked like endless acres of snow-covered pasture stretching toward the mountains. It was bigger than she'd expected, more established. The kind of place that spoke of success and permanence, everything Isabella's life had lacked for the past year. That's home, Nathan Harper said quietly, pulling the wagon up to the porch. Has been for 3 generations of Harpers. Isabella climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady from more than just the cold. The house loomed above her, its windows glowing with golden light that seemed almost too good to be true. You built all this? She asked. My grandfather started it, Nathan replied, his voice carrying a note of pride tempered by something else. My father added the barn and the south pasture. I've just been trying to keep it from falling down around my ears. Inside, the warmth hit Isabella like a physical blow. She stood in the entryway, snow melting off her borrowed coat and puddling on the wooden floor, too overwhelmed to move. The house was clean but lived in, furnished with sturdy pieces that had seen years of use. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, its hearth crackling with flames that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Books lined the shelves, their spines worn with handling. Family photographs sat on the mantel faces Isabella didn't recognize, but somehow wished she did. But it was the silence that struck her most. Not the oppressive silence of fear she'd grown accustomed to, but the peaceful quiet of a place where violence was unwelcome. Your room's upstairs, Nathan said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Second door on the right. There's a wash basin and clean linens. Supper will be ready in an hour if you want to get settled. Isabella followed him up a narrow staircase, her hand trailing along the smooth banister. The room he showed her was small but comfortable, a single bed covered with a handmade quilt, a wooden dresser, and a window that looked out over the ranch. But it was the details that made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. Fresh wildflowers in a mason jar on the windowsill despite the winter season, a bar of lavender soap beside the wash basin, a wool throw folded neatly at the foot of the bed. Someone had prepared this room for her, had thought about what she might need, what might make her feel welcome. The flowers, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, brought them from the greenhouse yesterday, Nathan explained. Said every woman deserves flowers. Mrs. Chen, a Chinese lady who'd been with the family for 20 years. Her husband worked the horses. They lived in the cabin by the creek. Nathan's explanation was matter-of-fact, but Isabella caught the kindness underneath. Mrs. Chen wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions about Isabella's past or judge her for the circumstances that had brought her here. Thank you, Isabella said, and meant it. Supper's at 6. Kitchen's downstairs and to the left. Nathan tipped his hat and left her alone. Isabella sank onto the bed, her hands shaking with more than cold. The quilt beneath her was soft and warm, stitched in a pattern of blues and yellows that reminded her of summer skies. When was the last time she'd slept in a real bed? In a room with a door she could lock? She rose and walked to the window, looking out over the ranch. Snow continued to fall, but gently now, no longer driven by the savage wind that had nearly killed her in town. In the barn, she could see the warm glow of lanterns and hear the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. A movement caught her eye. Nathan emerged from the barn, a feed bucket in one hand, and made his way toward the house. Even in the snow, his movements were sure and purposeful. He wasn't a young man Isabella guessed him to be in his mid-30s, but he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. As if sensing her watching, he looked up at her window. Isabella stepped back quickly, embarrassed to be caught staring, but not before she saw him tip his hat in her direction. The gesture was so casual, so naturally respectful, that it made something flutter in Isabella's chest. When was the last time a man had acknowledged her as anything other than an object to be used or a problem to be solved? She unpacked her few belongings, 2 dresses, both worn thin, a small wooden cross her grandmother had given her, and a photograph of her parents taken on their wedding day. The photograph went on the dresser beside the flowers, and suddenly the room felt more like hers and less like Charity. Downstairs, she found the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed again. The room was large and bright, with a massive cast-iron stove, a long wooden table, and shelves lined with dishes and cooking implements. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with the scent of sage and thyme. Nathan stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He'd removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with small scars, evidence of a life spent working with his hands. But it was the careful way he moved, the attention he paid to his cooking, that surprised her. Beef stew, he said without turning around. Nothing fancy, but it's hot. Isabella moved closer, drawn by the rich aroma, her stomach cramped with hunger, reminding her that she hadn't eaten a proper meal in days. Can I help? Not tonight. You're a guest tonight. Work starts tomorrow. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and set them on the table. Bread's there if you want it. Isabella sat across from him, her hands wrapped around the warm bowl. The stew was simple but perfectly seasoned, the meat tender and the vegetables cooked just right. She ate slowly, trying not to show how desperately hungry she was. You're a good cook, she said after a few spoonfuls. Mrs. Chen taught me, Nathan replied with a self-deprecating smile. Said a man living alone needed to know more than how to burn bacon. Still working on it. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. The only sounds the crackle of the fire and the wind outside. Isabella found herself sneaking glances at her host, trying to understand him. In her experience, men like Nathan Harper, successful, established, respected, didn't go out of their way to help women like her. The scar on his face caught the firelight, and she wondered about its origin. A knife fight? An accident? Whatever had caused it, it had been serious, deep enough to leave a permanent mark, to change the shape of his face forever. Why aren't you married? The question slipped out before she could stop it, and Isabella immediately regretted it. I'm sorry. That's not my business. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his spoon suspended halfway to his mouth. I was engaged once. Her name was Catherine. She died 3 years ago. Pneumonia. I'm sorry. She was a good woman. Patient, kind. The kind of person who saw the best in everyone. His voice carried a note of old grief, well-worn, but never quite healed. She would have liked you. The compliment hit Isabella unexpectedly hard. She looked down at her bowl, blinking back sudden tears. You don't know me, she whispered. I know enough, Nathan said gently. I know you've got pride even when you can't afford it. I know you're stronger than you look, or you wouldn't have survived what you've been through. And I know you're running from something, but you're not running toward trouble. You're running towards something better. Isabella's breath caught. How could he see so much when she tried so hard to hide it all? What makes you think I'm running from anything? She asked. Because nobody ends up sleeping in alleys in December unless they're running from something worse than cold, Nathan said, his gray eyes steady on hers. Question is whether you're ready to stop running. Isabella set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. What if what I'm running from follows me here? Then we'll deal with it. The simple certainty in his voice made something tight in Isabella's chest loosen. You're not alone anymore, Miss Cruz. The words hung between them like a promise. And for the first time in months, Isabella dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, she might have found a place to rest. After dinner, Nathan showed her how to bank the fire for the night, how to lock the doors, where to find extra blankets if she got cold. His explanations were practical, matter of fact, but Isabella sensed the care behind them. He was making sure she felt safe, secure. I'll be up before dawn, he said as they prepared to retire. Ranch doesn't run itself, but you don't need to worry about that tomorrow. Take the day to get settled, get your strength back. I'm not afraid of work, Isabella said quickly. She'd learned the hard way that gratitude had to be proven through action. Nathan's smile was gentle. I know you're not, but you've been through a lot. One day to catch your breath won't hurt. As Isabella climbed the stairs to her room, she felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the deeper hope of belonging somewhere, to someone who saw her worth. She prepared for bed slowly, savoring the luxury of privacy, of safety. The bed was soft, the quilts warm, and for the first time since fleeing Arizona, she wasn't afraid of what morning might bring. But as she drifted off to sleep, Nathan's words echoed in her mind. You're running from something, but you're not running toward trouble. He was wrong about that last part. Trouble was exactly what she was running toward, because trouble had a name and a face and enough money to buy whatever justice he needed. Diego Cruz would find her eventually. He always did. The question was whether this fragile new sanctuary would survive the storm that was coming, or whether her brother's reach would extend even here, to this peaceful ranch where a scarred man offered kindness without expecting payment. Outside her window, snow continued to fall, covering the world in pristine white. Beautiful, but temporary. Like everything good in Isabella's life, it wouldn't last. But for tonight, wrapped in warmth and safety, she allowed herself to dream of a different ending to her story. One where the good man won, where truth mattered more than money, where a woman's word carried weight. One where love might bloom even in the frozen ground of a broken heart. It was a dangerous dream, but it was hers. And after so many nights of nightmares, Isabella Cruz chose to hold on to it with both hands. Isabella's first morning at the Broken Arrow Ranch began with the sound of roosters crowing and the acrid smell of coffee boiling over a fire that sputtered more than it crackled. She rose before dawn, the discomfort of sleeping in an unfamiliar place only serving to harden her determination. The room was small but clean, and most importantly, it was hers. She had seen worse, much worse. Nathan moved through his morning chores like a man possessed, his motions clipped and efficient, his expression unreadable. She saw the exhaustion stamped deep into his features, the gauntness that came from too many missed meals and too little rest. But beneath that weathered exterior, Isabella sensed something kinder, though he guarded it as fiercely as a man might protect his gold. Mrs. Chen arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, a small Chinese woman with graying hair and intelligent eyes. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who knew exactly what needed doing. "You are Isabella," she said, setting the basket on the kitchen table. "Mr. Nathan told me about you. I am Lin Chen, but everyone calls me Mrs. Chen." "Thank you for the flowers," Isabella said. "They were very thoughtful." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "A room without flowers is like a day without sun. Not good for the spirit." For the next several hours, Mrs. Chen guided Isabella through the rhythms of ranch life. The kitchen was well stocked, but needed daily maintenance: bread to be baked, meals planned and prepared, dishes washed and put away. The house required sweeping, dusting, and the kind of attention to detail that kept a home comfortable rather than merely livable. "Mr. Nathan is a good man," Mrs. Chen said as they folded laundry together. "But he works too hard, eats too little, forgets to take care of himself." "Has he been alone long?" Isabella asked, remembering the sadness in his voice when he'd mentioned Catherine. "3 years since Miss Catherine died. Before that, he was different man. Laughed more. Planned for future. Now he just exists." Mrs. Chen's expression was troubled. "He needs someone to remind him that life is for living, not just surviving." Isabella understood that feeling all too well. By afternoon, Mrs. Chen had departed with promises to return tomorrow, and Isabella found herself alone in the house. She stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the materials for Nathan's dinner, and felt the familiar weight of performance anxiety settle on her shoulders. What if she disappointed him? What if her cooking wasn't good enough? Her cleaning not thorough enough? What if he realized he'd made a mistake bringing her here? She was peeling potatoes when she heard boots on the porch. Nathan came in carrying firewood, his cheeks red from cold and his hair dusted with snow. "Smells good in here," he said, stacking wood by the stove. "What's for dinner?" "Chicken and dumplings," Isabella replied. "Mrs. Chen showed me where you keep the root vegetables." Nathan's expression was unreadable. "Catherine used to make that." Isabella's hand stilled on the potato peeler. Had she overstepped? Made some terrible mistake? "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I can make something else." "No." Nathan's voice was firm but not unkind. "It's fine. Good even. Some memories deserve to be honored, not avoided." He disappeared upstairs to wash up, leaving Isabella to wonder what kind of man he was, that he could speak of his dead fiancée with such quiet grace. In her experience, men either worshipped their lost loves to the point of obsession or buried them so deep that mentioning them became forbidden. Nathan seemed to do neither. Dinner was a quiet affair, but not uncomfortably so. Nathan praised the dumplings. They were light and fluffy, just the way Mrs. Chen had taught her, and asked about Isabella's day without prying into subjects she wasn't ready to discuss. "How long have you lived here?" Isabella asked as they cleared the dishes. "Born here. Left for a few years during the war. Came back after." Nathan's answer was brief, but Isabella caught the shadow that crossed his face at the mention of the war. "Did you fight?" "Union cavalry. Saw action in Tennessee and Georgia." He dried a plate with mechanical precision. "Not something I talk about much." Isabella nodded, understanding. Everyone who lived through the war carried scars, some visible, some not. She'd seen enough damaged men to recognize the signs. The careful way Nathan moved, the alertness that never quite left his eyes, the occasional moment when he seemed to be listening to something only he could hear. But there was something else about his scar, something that nagged at her. The edges were too clean, too deliberate for a battlefield wound. This looked like something inflicted with purpose, with malice. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Fighting, I mean." Nathan considered this. "Regret's a useless emotion, but I'm glad it's over." They finished the dishes in companionable silence, and Isabella found herself relaxing for the first time all day. Nathan's presence was peaceful. He didn't fill every moment with chatter, didn't seem to need constant attention or entertainment. He was simply there, solid and reliable as the mountains outside. "I'll be heading to town tomorrow," he said as they banked the fire for the night. "Need supplies and want to check on the mail. You're welcome to come if you want, or stay here if you prefer." Isabella's blood chilled. Town meant people who might recognize her, questions she wasn't ready to answer, the possibility of word getting back to Diego. "I'll stay here," she said quickly. "There's plenty to keep me busy." Nathan studied her face in the firelight, and Isabella wondered how much he could see, how much he understood about the fear that kept her looking over her shoulder. "All right," he said finally. "I'll bring back anything you need from the store." That night, Isabella lay in her bed listening to the sounds of the house settling around her. For the first time in months, she wasn't cold, wasn't hungry, wasn't afraid of what morning might bring. But as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was temporary, that somewhere out there, danger was searching for her. She was right. At that very moment, 200 miles away in Phoenix, Diego Cruz was reading a telegram that would change everything. Mexican woman matching. Description: seen in Silver Ridge, Montana. Stop traveling with local rancher. Stop awaiting instructions. Stop. The next morning brought news that would shatter Isabella's fragile sense of security. Nathan returned from town with a grim expression in an envelope that he set carefully on the kitchen table. Isabella was kneading bread dough when she saw him through the window, and something in the rhythm of his horse's hooves made her pause. He usually drove with a steady, unhurried pace. Today the horse was moving faster, with an urgency that sent ice down Isabella's spine. "Good trip to town?" she asked, though the question felt hollow. Nathan removed his hat and coat with deliberate care. "Isabella, we need to talk." The words she'd been dreading. Isabella's hands clenched in her apron, but she kept her voice steady. "What about?" Nathan gestured toward the chairs by the fire. "Why don't you sit down?" "I'd rather stand." Isabella's chin lifted with the stubborn pride that had kept her alive this long. "Whatever it is, just say it." Nathan nodded, respecting her choice. "There's been a man asking questions in town. Well-dressed fellow, speaks educated English with a Spanish accent. Claims to be looking for his sister, a young Mexican woman who might be in distress." Isabella's world tilted. She gripped the back of a chair to keep from swaying. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, because nobody asked me directly. But Tom Bradley at the general store mentioned that I'd hired some help recently. The man seemed very interested in that information." "How long?" Isabella's voice came out as a whisper. "How long do I have before he comes here?" Nathan moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring, even as Isabella's world crumbled around her. "Isabella, who is this man? What does he want with you?" For a moment, Isabella considered lying. She'd become good at crafting stories that explained without revealing, that satisfied curiosity without exposing the truth. But looking at Nathan's face, at the concern and determination there, she found she couldn't do it. "His name is Diego Cruz," she said, the words tasting like ash. "He's my brother, and he wants me dead." Nathan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, a stillness that reminded Isabella he'd been a soldier once. "Why?" Isabella walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered yard that had become her sanctuary. "Because I know what he is, because I can destroy everything he's built with a few words to the right people." "What did he do?" The question was simple, but the answer was a tangled web of family loyalty, masculine pride, and the kind of cruelty that festered in the dark. Isabella had carried the secret for so long that speaking it felt like pulling splinters from an infected wound. 3 years ago, Diego was courting the daughter of one of our father's business partners, Maria Vasquez. She was 16, sweet, trusting. Isabella's hands pressed against the windowsill. "Diego, he forced himself on her, brutally, left her bleeding and broken." Behind her, she heard Nathan's sharp intake of breath. Maria's family tried to seek justice, but Diego had already prepared his defense. He claimed she was hysterical, that she'd seduced him and then cried rape when he refused to marry her. He had witnesses, friends of his, who swore they'd seen her throwing herself at him. Isabella turned from the window, meeting Nathan's eyes. "And people believed him. Men like Diego don't commit rape. They're pillars of the community, respectable, successful. Girls like Maria, on the other hand, well, girls lie about these things all the time, don't they?" "But you knew the truth," Nathan said quietly. "I saw Maria the night it happened, saw the bruises, heard her story, and I believed her. What happened to her? Her family left town in shame. No one would hire her father. No one would do business with them. They lost everything." Isabella's voice cracked. "Maria killed herself 6 months later, threw herself from a bridge in Phoenix." Nathan was quiet for a long moment, processing this. And you tried to expose him. I tried to tell our father, but Diego had gotten there first. Painted me as a jealous spinster trying to ruin his reputation out of spite. When that didn't work, Isabella's hand moved unconsciously to her ribs, where the scars from Diego's beating had faded but never disappeared. He made it clear what would happen if I ever spoke against him again. So you ran. I ran, Isabella laughed bitterly, and I've been running ever since. But Diego has money, connections, patience. He's been tracking me across 3 territories, destroying every safe place I've found. Nathan stood and moved to her, his movements careful and deliberate. What does he want now? To silence me permanently. He's getting married to the daughter of a territorial judge, no less. A scandal now would ruin everything he's worked for. Isabella met Nathan's eyes. He's not coming here to bring me home, Nathan. He's coming here to kill me. The words hung in the air between them like a death sentence. Isabella waited for Nathan to step back, to tell her she had to leave, to protect himself and his ranch from the violence that followed her wherever she went. Instead, he stepped closer. How long since you've seen him? Nathan asked. 8 months in Tucson. I barely got away that time. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. And he's been asking questions in town, which means he's getting close but hasn't found you yet. Nathan, Isabella's voice was pleading, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Diego doesn't just kill, he destroys. Anyone who helps me, anyone who gets in his way, he'll ruin their lives, their reputation, everything they've built. Isabella, Nathan's hand settled gently on her shoulders. Look at me. She did, expecting to see fear or regret or the careful calculation of a man weighing his options. Instead, she saw determination and something that might have been tenderness. You're not running anymore, he said quietly. Not unless you want to. This is your home now, and I don't let anyone threaten what's mine. I'm not yours, Isabella whispered, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Nathan's smile was gentle. Aren't you? Before Isabella could answer, the sound of approaching horses cut through the afternoon air. Multiple riders moving fast. Nathan was at the window in 2 strides, his body tense as he peered through the glass. 4 men, armed, the leaders wearing a fancy coat. Isabella joined him at the window and her blood turned to ice water. Even at a distance, she recognized the perfect posture, the expensive clothes, the arrogant way he sat his horse. Diego, she breathed. Nathan's hand moved to the rifle hanging above the fireplace. Stay here. I'll handle this. No. Isabella caught his arm. You don't know him. He's dangerous. So am I. Nathan's voice carried the quiet authority of a man who'd faced death before and wasn't impressed by it. Trust me, Isabella. As the riders drew closer, Isabella saw that Diego had brought his usual companions, men who looked respectable on the surface, but carried themselves like predators. Men who would do anything for money and ask no questions about why. Nathan, Isabella said urgently, there's something else you need to know. Diego has legal papers, forged documents, claiming I stole money from our family. If he can't kill me quietly, he'll have me arrested and hanged legally. Nathan's jaw tightened. We'll see about that. The riders had reached the porch. Through the window, Isabella could see Diego dismounting with theatrical flourish, his movements calculated to convey wealth and authority. He'd always been good at playing the part of the concerned brother, the respectable gentleman, the victim of circumstances beyond his control. A knock came at the door, polite, civilized, carrying no hint of the violence it promised. Nathan looked at Isabella one last time. You trust me? Isabella thought of all the men who'd asked her that question. Her father who'd chosen his son over justice. The sheriff in Phoenix who'd promised protection but delivered betrayal. The countless others who'd seen her as something to be used or discarded. But Nathan Harper had asked for nothing from her except honest work. Had treated her with respect when the world had taught her to expect nothing but scorn. Had offered to stand between her and danger without asking what he might gain from it. Yeah, she said. I trust you. Nathan smiled the first real smile she'd seen from him and opened the door. Afternoon, he said pleasantly, as if armed men showing up at his ranch was the most natural thing in the world. Something I can help you with. Diego Cruz stepped forward, his hat in his hands and concern written across his handsome features like a masterfully crafted mask. Good afternoon, senor. I am Diego Cruz, and I believe you may have information about my dear sister Isabella. I've been searching for her across 3 territories. She disappeared from our family home in Arizona under troubling circumstances. Nathan leaned against the doorframe with casual indifference that didn't fool Isabella for a moment. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand remained close to his weapon. That's so. What kind of troubling circumstances? I'm afraid Isabella has been unwell, Diego said, his voice dripping with false concern. She suffers from fits of hysteria, delusions. Our family doctor believes she may be dangerous to herself and others. He reached into his coat and produced an official-looking document. I have papers from the territorial court authorizing me to bring her home for treatment. Isabella's hands clenched into fists. The same lies, the same manufactured evidence. Diego had perfected his performance over the years, but she could see through it to the cold calculation underneath. Nathan glanced at the papers without touching them. Sounds serious. What makes you think she's been around here? A merchant in town mentioned that a Mexican woman had been seen at this ranch. I'm hoping. Diego's eyes shifted, trying to see past Nathan into the house. Perhaps I could speak with her? Just to assure myself of her well-being. Afraid I can't help you, Nathan said pleasantly. Haven't seen any Mexican women around these parts. Just me and my hired hands. Diego's mask slipped for just a moment, a flash of the cold rage that Isabella knew so well. Senor, I think you misunderstand the gravity of the situation. My sister is not well. She may have misrepresented herself to you, told you stories designed to gain your sympathy. What kind of stories? Nathan's voice remained conversational, but Isabella could hear the steel underneath. She has a habit of claiming that men have mistreated her. It's part of her condition, you understand. She creates elaborate fantasies of persecution. Diego stepped closer, his voice taking on a confidential tone. If she has told you such tales, I assure you they are the product of a diseased mind. Isabella's breath caught. Even now, even after everything, Diego's ability to twist the truth left her reeling. He made her sound like a madwoman, a liar, a burden to be managed rather than a victim seeking justice. That's mighty convenient, Nathan observed. Woman claims abuse and you say she's crazy, makes it real easy to dismiss whatever she might say about you. Diego's smile tightened. I understand your skepticism, senor, but I have medical documentation, witness statements, legal authority. My sister needs help, not enablement of her delusions. Uh-huh. Nathan straightened up, no longer leaning casually. Well, like I said, I haven't seen anyone matching that description. Might want to try the next ranch over. I wonder, Diego said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge, if you would object to my men searching your property, just to put my mind at ease. I would object, Nathan said flatly, strongly. The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment. Isabella could feel the tension crackling between them, like electricity before a storm. That's unfortunate, Diego said finally, because I'm afraid I must insist. He gestured to his men who began to dismount with the slow, deliberate movements of professionals preparing for violence. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Nathan said quietly. There was something in his voice, a calm certainty, that made even Diego pause. Isabella had heard that tone before, from men who'd seen combat and weren't impressed by threats. You would interfere with a legal matter? Diego asked. I would defend my property against trespassers, Nathan replied. And in Montana, a man has the right to do that with whatever force necessary. Diego's eyes narrowed. You're making a serious mistake, senor. I have influence, connections. I can make life very difficult for someone who obstructs justice. Justice? Nathan repeated the word like it tasted bitter. That's an interesting way to describe hunting down a woman who's running for her life. Ah, Diego's smile was cold and triumphant. So, you have seen her. I thought so. Isabella's heart stopped. Had Nathan just made a fatal mistake? But Nathan's expression didn't change. I've seen a lot of things in my time. Women running from men who call them crazy when they try to tell the truth about what was done to them. Men who use the law like a weapon to silence the people they've hurt. That ring any bells? Diego's facade finally cracked completely. You don't know what you're dealing with, gringo. That woman is a liar and a thief. She's poisoned your mind with her stories, but I know what she is. And what's that? A whore who seduces men with sob stories, then robs them blind. Diego's voice turned vicious. Ask her about the money she stole from our father. Ask her about the men she's cheated across 3 territories. Ask her why she's really running. Isabella stepped into view then, unable to hide any longer. She moved to stand beside Nathan, her chin raised despite the fear clawing at her throat. Why don't you ask me yourself, hermano? She said quietly. Diego's eyes lit up with savage satisfaction. Isabella, mi querida hermana, you look well. Ranch life agrees with you. It does, Isabella said steadily. Amazing what happens when you're not living in fear. Fear? Diego's laugh was ugly. You should fear me, hermana. You've caused our family great embarrassment, great expense. But I'm here to bring you home, to help you get the treatment you need. I don't need treatment. I need you to leave me alone. That's not your decision to make. Diego pulled out the legal documents again. These papers give me the authority to take you into custody for your own protection. Nathan plucked the papers from Diego's hand and glanced at them. Funny thing about these papers, they're signed by Judge Morrison in Santa Fe. What about it? Judge Morrison died 6 months ago, Nathan said, tearing the documents in half. I was at his funeral. Diego's face went white, then red with rage. He'd been caught in his lie, exposed in front of his men and his sister, and the man who dared to protect her. You've made a grave error, he snarled. Both of you. The only error, Nathan said, is you coming here and threatening what's mine. Yours. Diego's eyes glittered with malice. Is that what she told you? That she's yours? Did she spread her legs and convince you she's worth protecting? Nathan moved so fast Isabella barely saw it. One moment he was standing calmly beside her. The next his fist connected with Diego's jaw with a sound like breaking wood. Diego staggered backward, blood streaming from his split lip. His men reached for their guns but stopped when they found themselves staring down the barrel of Nathan's rifle. He'd drawn it from beside the door with practiced speed. I suggest, Nathan said conversationally, that you apologize to the lady. Diego wiped blood from his mouth, his eyes blazing with hatred. This isn't over, Harper. I know your name now. I know where you live. You think you can protect her? You think you can stand against me? I think I just did, Nathan replied. Enjoy it while you can, Diego said, mounting his horse with as much dignity as he could muster. Because next time I won't come alone. And next time I'll have real papers and real law behind me. As the riders galloped away, Isabella sagged against the doorframe. The confrontation she'd been dreading for months was over, but she knew it was only the beginning. He'll be back, she said quietly. I know. Nathan's arm came around her shoulders, steady and warm. But when he comes, we'll be ready. Isabella looked up at him, this man who just risked everything to defend her. Why? Why would you do this for me? Nathan's gray eyes were soft in the afternoon light. Because everyone deserves someone to stand with them when the darkness comes calling. And because, he paused as if gathering courage, because somewhere along the way, you stopped being just my housekeeper and started being something more important. What's that? Someone I care about, Nathan said simply. Someone worth fighting for. As they watched Diego's dust trail disappear over the ridge, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate hope of survival, but the deeper hope of belonging somewhere, to someone who saw her worth. But she also knew Diego's threat wasn't empty. He would be back, and next time he'd bring everything he had to destroy her and anyone who stood with her. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Nathan told her about the scar. It was 3 years ago, he said, staring into the flames. Right after Catherine died, I was drinking too much, not caring about much of anything. Got into a fight in town over something stupid. 3 men jumped me in an alley, and one of them had a knife. Isabella waited, sensing there was more. Funny thing is, I was almost glad when I felt the blade go in. Thought maybe I'd join Catherine, you know? But Mrs. Chen found me, got the doctor. Took 43 stitches to put my face back together. Nathan touched the scar unconsciously. When I healed up, I realized something. I was still alive for a reason. Just took me this long to figure out what that reason was. Isabella's throat tightened. What's the reason? Nathan looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. To protect what matters. To stand between good people and the evil that wants to destroy them. To be the man Catherine believed I could be. She'd be proud of you, Isabella whispered. I hope so, because what's coming next is going to test everything we've got. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering Diego's tracks and giving them a temporary reprieve. But Isabella knew her brother was somewhere out there, planning his next move, gathering his resources for the final assault. The question was whether their love would be strong enough to survive what was coming, whether truth could triumph over lies, whether justice could prevail over money and influence, whether two broken people could heal each other's wounds before the darkness swallowed them both. But for tonight, wrapped in Nathan's arms by the fire, Isabella chose to believe in tomorrow. Because sometimes that's all you need to keep the hope alive. One more day, one more chance, one more moment of grace in a world that had forgotten what mercy looked like. And somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled a lonely sound that echoed across the frozen landscape like a warning of the storms yet to come. The letter arrived 3 days later, delivered by a nervous young man who wouldn't meet Isabella's eyes as he handed over the cream-colored envelope. Her name was written across the front in Diego's precise handwriting, each letter formed with the careful education of a man who valued appearances above all else. Isabella's hands shook as she broke the wax seal. Inside, the message was brief but devastating. My dearest sister, how delightful to see you looking so well. Ranch life clearly agrees with you, though I suspect your employment arrangement is rather more intimate than traditional domestic service. I write to inform you that I have filed a formal complaint with the territorial authorities regarding your theft of $1,200 from our father's business. 3 witnesses have sworn they saw you take the money, and father has reluctantly agreed to press charges. Additionally, I have documentation of your various activities since leaving Arizona. The authorities are quite interested in the pattern of deception and theft that seems to follow wherever you go. Turn yourself in voluntarily, and I may be inclined toward mercy. Continue this charade, and I will destroy not only you, but anyone foolish enough to shelter you. Your loving brother, Diego. Isabella sank into a kitchen chair, the letter trembling in her hands. $1,200. 3 witnesses. A pattern of theft across 3 territories. Diego had been busy in the days since their confrontation, weaving a web of lies so comprehensive that fighting it would be nearly impossible. Isabella? Nathan's voice came from the doorway. He'd been checking the stock in the south pasture, but one look at her face brought him quickly to her side. What is it? She handed him the letter without a word. Nathan read it twice, his jaw tightening with each line. Bastard, he said quietly. Forgive the language, but there's no other word for it. It's not language I haven't heard before. Isabella's voice was hollow. The question is, what do we do now? Nathan set the letter on the table and sat across from her. We fight it. These are lies. We can prove they're lies. How? Isabella's laugh was bitter. Diego has money, influence, connections. He's had months to prepare this story, to buy witnesses, to create evidence. What do I have? The word of a Mexican woman with no family, no money, no reputation to protect. You have me, Nathan said simply. The declaration hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. Isabella looked at Nathan, really looked at him, and saw the determination in his gray eyes, the set of his jaw that spoke of decisions made and lines drawn. Nathan, she said softly, you don't understand what you're saying. If you stand with me, Diego will destroy you too. Your ranch, your good name, everything you've built. Let him try. Nathan's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. I've been poor before, lost everything I cared about before. But I won't stand by and watch an innocent woman be crucified by a man who's too much of a coward to face what he's done. Isabella felt tears sting her eyes. When was the last time someone had called her innocent? When had anyone looked past the circumstances of her birth, her accent, her desperate flight from justice, to see the truth underneath? There's more, she said quietly. In the letter, he mentions my activities. He's going to claim I'm a prostitute, Nathan. that I've been selling myself to survive. Nathan's expression didn't change. Have you? No. The word came out fierce and proud. I've scrubbed floors, washed dishes, cleaned stables, mended clothes until my fingers bled, but I've never sold my body, not once. Then that's the truth, and the truth is what we'll stand on. But who's going to believe it? A Mexican woman traveling alone, taking work where she can find it, running from the law? Isabella's voice cracked. In their minds, I'm already guilty. Nathan reached across the table and took her hands in his. His palms were rough from years of ranch work, scarred from handling horses and cattle, but his touch was gentle. Isabella, he said quietly, look at me. She did, seeing her own fear reflected in his eyes, but also seeing something else, something that looked like love. I believe you, he said, not because I'm naive or foolish or blinded by attraction. I believe you because I've watched you for weeks now. I've seen your character, your strength, your integrity. I've seen how you work, how you treat the animals, how you carry yourself with dignity even when the world's trying to strip it away. Isabella's throat tightened. That's not enough. Character doesn't stand up in court. Maybe not, but it stands up here. Nathan pressed her hands against his chest over his heart. And sometimes that's all we have. Before Isabella could respond, the sound of multiple horses approaching made them both freeze. Through the kitchen window, she could see a cloud of dust rising from the road. Too many riders for a casual visit. Nathan was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. 6 men, territorial marshal, and 5 deputies, by the look of their badges. Isabella's blood turned to ice. It's happening. Diego's moved faster than I thought. Isabella Cruz! The call came from outside, official and implacable. This is U.S. Marshal Davies. I have a warrant for your arrest. Come out with your hands visible. Nathan's hand moved to his rifle, but Isabella caught his arm. No, she said firmly. You can't fight the federal government, Nathan. You'll only make things worse. I won't let them take you. You have to. Isabella stood, smoothing down her skirt with hands that only trembled slightly. If there's any chance of proving my innocence, I have to go with them. Running now would only confirm Diego's lies. Nathan's face was anguished. Isabella, promise me, she said urgently. Promise me you won't do anything stupid. Don't throw your life away trying to fight this. I can't promise that. Then promise me you'll be smart about it. If there's a way to help me, if there's evidence to be found, promise me you'll find it. Nathan stared at her for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. I promise. But Isabella, this isn't over. Whatever happens, wherever they take you, I will find a way to bring you home. Home. The word hit Isabella like a physical blow. When had this ranch, this house, this man become home to her? Miss Cruz! The marshal's voice was getting impatient. I'm counting to 10, then we're coming in. Isabella kissed Nathan quickly, desperately, tasting salt tears and desperate hope. Remember what I told you about Maria, about what really happened. If you can find proof. I will, Nathan said fiercely. I swear to you, I will. Isabella walked to the door on unsteady legs, Nathan beside her. She could feel his tension, the barely controlled urge to fight, to protect, to refuse to let her go. But he kept his word, stayed beside her instead of reaching for his gun. Marshal Davies was a gray-haired man with tired eyes and the look of someone who'd arrested too many people to take satisfaction in it anymore. He held an official warrant, properly sealed and witnessed. Isabella Cruz, he said formally, you're under arrest for theft of $1,200 from Cruz Enterprises of Phoenix, Arizona territory. You have the right to legal representation. I understand, Isabella said quietly. Marshal, Nathan said carefully, may I ask who filed the complaint? Your brother, Diego Cruz, says he's been tracking you for months, trying to bring you home to face justice. Davies glanced at Nathan. You the one who's been harboring her? She's my employee, Nathan said. Hired her to help with domestic work. Uh-huh. Davies didn't look convinced. Well, you might want to find yourself a lawyer, Mackenzie. Harboring a fugitive is a federal offense. As the marshal placed iron shackles around Isabella's wrists, she felt the weight of them like a death sentence. But she also felt something else, the memory of Nathan's hands holding hers, the promise in his voice, the look in his eyes that said he would move heaven and earth to bring her home. "Where are you taking her?" Nathan asked. "Helena for trial. Federal courthouse has jurisdiction over territorial crimes." Davies helped Isabella into the back of a prison wagon. "Trial set for next week." Next week. 7 days for Nathan to find evidence, to build a defense, to somehow prove what Diego had spent months making unprovable. As the wagon rolled away from the Broken Arrow Ranch, Isabella pressed her face to the small barred window and watched Nathan's figure grow smaller in the distance. He stood on the porch until she could no longer see him, and she knew he was making plans, forming strategies, preparing to fight a war he couldn't possibly win. But she also knew he would try, because that's who Nathan Harper was, a man who kept his promises, no matter the cost. The Helena jail was a fortress of gray stone that seemed to swallow hope the moment you crossed its threshold. Isabella's cell was small and cold, with a narrow window too high to see through, and a straw mattress that smelled of despair and broken dreams. She'd been here for 3 days, waiting for her trial, listening to the sounds of the city beyond the walls, and wondering if Nathan was somewhere out there, fighting for her life while she sat helpless in iron chains. The food was thin gruel and stale bread. The other prisoners were mostly drunks and petty thieves, men who watched her with calculating eyes and made comments in languages they thought she couldn't understand. Isabella kept to herself, conserved her strength, and tried not to think about the gallows she'd glimpsed in the courthouse yard. On the 4th day, she had a visitor. "Isabella Cruz?" The guard's voice was gruff but not unkind. "You got a lawyer wants to see you." Isabella's heart leaped. Had Nathan found someone willing to take her case? She followed the guard through stone corridors that echoed with the sound of their footsteps, down to a small room with a wooden table and 2 chairs. The man waiting for her wasn't what she'd expected. He was young, maybe 30, with sandy hair and intelligent blue eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. His clothes were good but not expensive, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd fought uphill battles before. "Miss Cruz," he said, rising as she entered. "I'm James Crawford, attorney at law. Nathan Harper hired me to represent you." Isabella sank into the chair across from him, relief making her weak. Is he all right?" "He's fine, working day and night to build your defense." Crawford opened a leather satchel and pulled out a stack of papers. "He sends his love and wants you to know he hasn't given up. Neither have I." "Mr. Crawford," Isabella said carefully, "I should tell you from the start I don't have money to pay you." Crawford's smile was gentle. "Mr. Harper has taken care of that. But even if he hadn't, I'd have taken this case. Your brother's accusations don't sit right with me, and I've seen too many innocent people railroaded by money and influence." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "What do you know about the charges?" Crawford consulted his notes. "Theft of $1,200 from Cruz Enterprises, alleged to have occurred on September 20th of last year. 3 witnesses claim they saw you take the money from your father's safe." "It's all lies," Isabella said quietly. "Every word of it. I believe you. The question is proving it." Crawford leaned forward. "Tell me what really happened that night." Isabella closed her eyes, remembering. "September 20th was my birthday. I was working late in the store, doing inventory. Diego came in around 10 o'clock, drunk and angry about something. He started demanding things from me. Things I wouldn't give." "What kind of things?" Isabella's cheeks burned, but she forced herself to continue. "He wanted me to support his story about Maria, to tell people she was lying, that she'd thrown herself at him. When I refused, he became violent." Crawford made notes as she spoke. "Did anyone see this altercation?" "Number Diego made sure we were alone." Isabella's hand moved unconsciously to her ribs, where the bruises had taken weeks to heal. "He beat me, told me what would happen if I ever spoke against him again. Then he took money from the safe and said if I caused him any more trouble, he'd claim I stole it." "And that's when you decided to run?" "That's when I realized I had no choice. Diego had father convinced I was jealous and spiteful. He had the whole town believing he was the victim of my delusions." Isabella's voice grew bitter. "No one would have believed me if I'd accused him of beating me. They'd have said I was making excuses for the theft." Crawford nodded thoughtfully. What about the witnesses who claim they saw you take the money? Diego's friends, men who owe him money or favors. They'd swear the sky was green if Diego paid them enough. Nathan mentioned something about another girl, Maria Vasquez. Isabella's throat closed up. She's dead. Killed herself rather than live with what Diego did to her. But there might be records. People who knew what really happened. Maybe Maria had a friend, someone who knew details about that night. Crawford made more notes. This is good. Nathan's already tracking down some of these leads. Isabella felt a flicker of hope. You think we have a chance? I think we have truth on our side, and sometimes that's enough. Crawford's expression grew serious. But you should know, your brother has hired Cornelius Blackwood to prosecute the case. Isabella's blood chilled. She'd heard of Blackwood, a Helena lawyer with a reputation for crucifying defendants, especially women and minorities. He was expensive, ruthless, and had never lost a case. He's good, Crawford continued, but he's also arrogant. He thinks this case will be easy because you're Mexican, poor, and female. That arrogance might be his weakness. What about the trial? When does it start? Tomorrow morning, Judge Harrison presiding. Crawford began packing his papers. Isabella, I need you to prepare yourself. Blackwood is going to try to destroy your character, make you look like a liar and a whore. He'll bring up every desperate thing you've done to survive, every questionable situation you've been in. Isabella nodded, her stomach knotting with dread. I understand. Don't let him rattle you. Stick to the truth, answer only what you're asked. And remember, Nathan and I believe in you. That has to be enough. That night, Isabella lay on her straw mattress and stared at the ceiling, preparing herself for battle. Tomorrow she would face Diego across a courtroom, with her life hanging in the balance. But she wouldn't face him alone. Somewhere in the city, Nathan was working to save her. A lawyer she'd never met was preparing to fight for her freedom. For the first time in her life, Isabella had people who believed in her innocence. The question was whether that would be enough to overcome a system designed to favor men like Diego over women like her. Outside her window, snow began to fall, soft and white and pure, covering the city's sins in pristine beauty. Isabella watched it accumulate on the sill and tried to see it as a sign of hope rather than a burial shroud. Tomorrow would bring either freedom or death. But tonight, for the first time since her arrest, Isabella Cruz dared to believe she might live to see another sunrise. The trial began with the sound of Judge Harrison's gavel echoing through the packed courtroom. Isabella sat beside James Crawford at the defendant's table, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. She wore the best dress Crawford had been able to find, simple but clean, designed to make her look respectable rather than seductive. Across the aisle, Cornelius Blackwood commanded the prosecution table like a general preparing for war. He was a large man with silver hair and the kind of presence that dominated any room he entered. Behind him sat Diego, perfectly groomed and radiating wounded dignity. But it was the sight in the gallery that gave Isabella strength. Nathan Harper sat in the front row, his gray eyes steady on hers, his presence a reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. The prosecution will present its opening statement, Judge Harrison announced. Blackwood rose with theatrical flourish, his voice carrying to every corner of the courtroom. Gentlemen of the jury, the case before you today is simple. A woman betrayed her own family's trust, stole money from the business that supported her, and when confronted with her crime, fled like the guilty party she is. He began pacing, his movements calculated for maximum effect. Isabella Cruz is not the innocent victim her defender would have you believe. She is a woman who has lived by deception, who has used her feminine wiles to manipulate good men into protecting her. Isabella's cheeks burned, but she kept her expression neutral as Blackwood painted her as a scheming seductress who preyed on masculine sympathy. The evidence will show that Miss Cruz stole $1,200 from her family's business, that 3 reliable witnesses saw her commit this crime, and that she has continued her pattern of deception across 3 territories. Blackwood's voice grew thunderous. This is not a case about family disputes or female hysteria. This is a case about theft, pure and simple. When Crawford rose for his opening statement, the contrast was striking. He spoke quietly, forcing the jury to lean in and listen. "Gentlemen," he began, "you're going to hear a lot of testimony over the next few days. Some of it will be true. Some of it will be purchased. Your job is to tell the difference." Crawford moved closer to the jury box. "Isabella Cruz is guilty of only one crime: being born a woman in a world that punishes women for speaking uncomfortable truths. The real criminal in this case is the man who beats women, who bribes witnesses, who uses the law as a weapon against those too weak to fight back." The first day was brutal. Blackwood called his witnesses one by one, each telling the same story with practiced precision. They'd seen Isabella at the safe, seen her take the money, seen her act suspiciously in the days that followed. Under Crawford's cross-examination, cracks began to appear in their stories. Diego Morales couldn't remember what Isabella had been wearing. Carlos Vega couldn't explain why he'd waited 6 months to report what he'd witnessed. Juan Santos stammered when Crawford asked about the money Diego had loaned him just days before the supposed theft. But the damage was done. 3 men had sworn under oath that Isabella Cruz was a thief. On the second day, Diego took the stand. He was masterful, wounded, but dignified, grieving for his lost sister while determined to see justice done. He spoke of Isabella's jealousy, her delusions, her pattern of making false accusations against respectable men. "She always resented my success," he said sadly. "Our father favored me, and Isabella couldn't accept that. When she began spreading lies about me to damage my reputation, I feared for her mental state." "What kind of lies?" Blackwood asked. "She claimed I had inappropriate relations with young women in town. Specifically, she made terrible accusations about Maria Vasquez, a sweet girl who tragically took her own life." Isabella's hands clenched into fists. Even here, under oath, Diego was twisting Maria's story to serve his own purposes. "Did you have inappropriate relations with Miss Vasquez?" Blackwood continued. "Absolutely not. Maria was troubled, unstable. She made advances that I politely rejected. When Isabella learned of this, she twisted the story to make me appear as the aggressor." Crawford's cross-examination was withering. He questioned Diego about his business dealings, his finances, his whereabouts on the night of the alleged theft. But Diego was prepared, his answers smooth and consistent. "Mr. Cruz," Crawford said, "isn't it true that you beat your sister on September 20th, and that the alleged theft is a fabrication designed to silence her?" "Absolutely not," Diego replied with perfect composure. "I have never raised a hand to Isabella. If she has injuries, they were likely sustained during her adventures since leaving home." By the end of the second day, Isabella could see doubt in the jurors' eyes. Diego's performance had been flawless, his witnesses credible enough to plant seeds of uncertainty. That evening, Crawford visited Isabella in her cell with news that made her heart sink. "I tried to reach Dr. Herrera," he said, "the man who treated Maria after the assault. But he died 2 months ago. Convenient timing for your brother." "What about Maria's friend, Carmen Santos?" Crawford's expression was grim. "She's disappeared. Her family says she left town suddenly, no forwarding address." Isabella felt the walls closing in. Diego got to them, paid them off, or threatened them into silence. "Probably, but we're not done yet." Crawford leaned forward. "Tomorrow you testify. This is our chance to tell your side of the story, to show the jury who you really are." "Will it be enough?" Crawford was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he said finally, "but it's all we have." That night, Isabella prayed to every saint her grandmother had ever taught her about. Tomorrow she would speak her truth in a courtroom full of people who'd already decided she was guilty. But she would speak it with Nathan's eyes watching her, with Crawford beside her, with the memory of Maria Vasquez demanding justice from beyond the grave. Isabella's hands shook as she placed them on the Bible to be sworn in. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with people standing along the walls and craning their necks to get a better view of the Mexican woman who dared to challenge a respectable businessman's word. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" the bailiff intoned. "I do," Isabella said, her voice stronger than she felt. Crawford approached the witness stand with a gentle smile designed to put her at ease. "Miss Cruz, please tell the court your full name and age." "Isabella Maria Cruz." I'm 24 years old. And where were you born? Phoenix, Arizona Territory. Crawford nodded, establishing the basic facts before moving to more dangerous ground. Miss Cruz, did you steal $1,200 from your family's business on September 20th, 1883? No, I did not. Have you ever stolen anything from your family or anyone else? Number never. Then how do you explain the testimony we've heard from 3 witnesses who claim they saw you take money from your father's safe? Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every gaze in the courtroom. They're lying. All 3 of them are friends of my brother Diego, and they've been paid to say what he wants them to say. A murmur rippled through the gallery, quickly silenced by Judge Harrison's gavel. Crawford continued methodically, allowing Isabella to tell her story in her own words. She spoke of her work in the family store, her careful attention to the books, her growing awareness of discrepancies that pointed to embezzlement, but not by her. Miss Cruz, Crawford said, you mentioned discrepancies in the books. What kind of discrepancies? Money missing from deposits, invoices that didn't match inventory, bank transfers that my father knew nothing about. Isabella's voice grew stronger as she spoke of concrete facts rather than accusations. I kept notes trying to figure out where the money was going. And what did you discover? That someone was systematically stealing from the business. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Always done carefully, spread out over time to avoid detection. Did you share these concerns with anyone? I tried to tell my father, but Diego convinced him I was making mistakes, that I was too emotional to handle the responsibility. Isabella's voice carried years of frustration. Every time I found evidence of theft, Diego had an explanation that made me look incompetent or hysterical. Crawford moved closer to the jury box. Miss Cruz, on the night of September 20th, what really happened? Isabella closed her eyes briefly, gathering courage for the hardest part of her testimony. I was working late, doing inventory. It was my birthday, and I'd stayed to finish the monthly reports. Diego came in around 10 o'clock. He was drunk and angry about something. What happened next? He started making demands. He wanted me to sign a statement saying that Maria Vasquez had lied about what he'd done to her. When I refused, he became violent. Isabella's voice grew quieter, but every word carried clearly through the silent courtroom. He beat me, hit me with his fists, kicked me when I fell. Said if I ever spoke against him again, he'd destroy me. Did he threaten you in any other way? Yes, he went to Father's safe and took $1,200. Said if I caused him any more trouble, he'd claim I stole it and have me arrested. Crawford paused, letting this sink in with the jury. Miss Cruz, you mentioned Maria Vasquez. Who was she? Isabella's throat tightened. She was 16 years old, the daughter of one of Father's business partners. Diego, he attacked her, violently assaulted her, left her bleeding and broken. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Judge Harrison gavelled for order. And what happened to Miss Vasquez? She tried to seek justice, but no one believed her. Diego had already prepared his defense, claimed she was hysterical and lying. Her family was ruined, forced to leave town in shame. Isabella's voice cracked. 6 months later, Maria threw herself from a bridge in Phoenix. She couldn't live with what he'd done to her. Objection! Blackwood roared, leaping to his feet. This is pure hearsay and character assassination, Your Honor. Miss Vasquez is not on trial here. Your Honor, Crawford replied calmly, this testimony goes directly to the defendant's motive for fleeing and to the pattern of intimidation and false accusations that led to the charges against her. Judge Harrison considered. I'll allow it, but keep it relevant to the case at hand. Crawford's examination continued for another hour, allowing Isabella to detail her journey across 3 territories, the honest work she'd found, the desperate circumstances that had finally brought her to Nathan's ranch. When he finished, Isabella felt drained but cleaner somehow, as if speaking the truth had washed away some of the shame and fear she'd carried for so long. Then Cornelius Blackwood rose for cross-examination, and Isabella's nightmare truly began. Miss Cruz, Blackwood began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You've told us quite a story, a tale of an innocent woman persecuted by an evil brother forced to flee across the wilderness like some tragic heroine from a novel. Isabella didn't respond. Crawford had coached her to answer only direct questions. But let's examine the facts, shall we? Blackwood moved closer, his presence intimidating. You admit you were alone with the safe on the night in question? Yes. You admit you had access to the money? Yes, but just yes or no, please. You admit you left town immediately after the alleged incident? Yes. You admit you've been living under false names, taking jobs under false pretenses, deceiving people about your past? Isabella's hands clenched. I've been trying to survive. By lying to everyone you met? By protecting myself? Blackwood smiled coldly. Let's talk about this supposed attack by your brother. You claim he beat you severely, yet you didn't seek medical attention, didn't report it to the authorities, didn't tell anyone what had happened. Who would have believed me? So you say. But isn't it more likely that this beating never happened? That you've invented this story to explain away your theft? No, that's not true. Miss Cruz, you've admitted to lying to potential employers about your identity. You've admitted to deceiving the good people who offered you shelter. Why should this jury believe you're telling the truth now? Isabella felt the trap closing around her. Every survival strategy she'd used over the past year was being twisted into evidence of her dishonesty. I never lied about who I was inside, she said desperately. I worked hard. I earned my keep. I never took anything that wasn't freely given. Ah, yes, let's discuss what was freely given. Blackwood's voice took on a salacious tone. You've been traveling alone for over a year, taking shelter with various men. Are you seriously asking this jury to believe that these men expected nothing in return for their hospitality? Isabella's cheeks burned. I never sold my body. Not once. No? Then perhaps you could explain how a woman with no money, no references, no family support managed to survive on the frontier for over a year? Hard work, honest work. Or perhaps, Blackwood suggested with a knowing smile, you had other assets to trade for the protection you needed. Crawford objected, but the damage was done. Isabella could see the doubt in the jurors' eyes, the calculation as they weighed Blackwood's insinuations against her denials. The cross-examination continued for 2 brutal hours. Blackwood dissected every choice Isabella had made, every desperate decision, every moment when she'd chosen survival over strict honesty. By the time he finished, Isabella felt stripped bare, her character assassinated as thoroughly as if she'd been physically beaten. But Crawford wasn't finished. During redirect examination, he gave Isabella the chance to explain herself, to put her choices in context. Miss Cruz, he said gently, when you were hungry and desperate, why didn't you turn to prostitution? It would have been easier than the back-breaking labor you chose instead. Isabella lifted her chin with the pride that had sustained her through the darkest nights. Because I am my grandmother's granddaughter. Because she taught me that my body is sacred, that my dignity is not for sale. Because even when I had nothing else, I had my self-respect. And when you gave false names to potential employers? Because telling the truth would have meant explaining why I was running, and that would have put good people in danger. I protected them the only way I knew how. Crawford nodded. One final question, Miss Cruz. In all your travels, in all the desperate situations you faced, have you ever taken anything that didn't belong to you? Never, Isabella said firmly. Not so much as a crust of bread. After Isabella stepped down, Crawford called his final witness, Nathan Harper. Nathan's testimony was brief but powerful. He spoke of Isabella's character, her work ethic, her obvious integrity. He detailed the threats Diego had made, the forged legal documents, the pattern of intimidation and lies. Mr. Harper, Crawford said, you've heard the prosecution's characterization of Miss Cruz as a seductress who trades her feminine wiles for protection. What's your response to that? Nathan's gray eyes were steady as steel. I've never met a woman with more dignity or strength. Isabella Cruz works harder than most men, asks for nothing she hasn't earned, and treats everyone with respect regardless of their station. If that's what passes for seduction these days, then I'd say we need more women like her in this world. Blackwood's cross-examination of Nathan was vicious, But the rancher's calm certainty proved unshakable. Yes, he cared for Isabella. Yes, he believed her story. No, he wasn't blinded by infatuation. He'd simply seen enough of life to recognize truth when he heard it. Closing arguments began on the third day. Blackwood painted Isabella as a master manipulator who used her gender and ethnicity to gain sympathy while systematically robbing the people who tried to help her. Crawford's closing was quieter but more devastating. He systematically destroyed the prosecution's case, pointing out the inconsistencies in the witness's testimony, the convenient timing of evidence that supported Diego's story, the complete lack of any corroborating proof beyond the word of three men who owed Diego money. Gentlemen of the jury, Crawford concluded, this case isn't about theft, it's about power. The power of a wealthy man to destroy a woman who dared to speak truth about his crimes. The power of money to buy witnesses and forge documents. The power of prejudice to make us assume guilt based on someone's race or gender rather than evidence. He paused, looking each juror in the eye. Isabella Cruz sits before you today not because she's guilty of theft, but because she's guilty of something far more dangerous in Diego Cruz's world. She's guilty of having principles, guilty of refusing to stay silent about rape and abuse, guilty of choosing integrity over safety. Crawford's voice grew stronger. You have the power to end this persecution. You have the power to say that truth matters more than money, that justice isn't for sale, that even a poor Mexican woman deserves the same protection under law as a rich businessman. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Isabella sat in her cell, staring at the walls and trying not to think about the gallows in the courthouse yard. Nathan and Crawford had done everything they could. Now it was up to 12 men who'd probably never spoken to a Mexican woman in their lives to decide whether she lived or died. When the bailiff came to escort her back to the courtroom, Isabella's legs felt like water. The gallery was packed again, every seat filled with people eager to witness the conclusion of the territory's most sensational trial. Judge Harrison called for order as the jury filed in. Their faces revealed nothing, but Isabella noticed that several of them couldn't meet her eyes. Have you reached a verdict? The judge asked. The foreman, a middle-aged banker with thinning hair, stood slowly. We have, Your Honor. What say you? Isabella held her breath, Nathan's hand finding hers across the barrier between the gallery and the defendant's table. We find the defendant, Isabella Cruz, not guilty of all charges. The courtroom exploded. People cheered and booed in equal measure, while Isabella sank into her chair, overwhelmed by relief so profound it left her dizzy. Nathan was somehow beside her, his arms around her, his voice in her ear promising that it was over. She was safe. She was free. But even as the bailiff removed her shackles, even as Crawford shook her hand and congratulated her on her courage, Isabella's eyes found Diego across the courtroom. Her brother's face was a mask of cold fury, and she could read the promise in his dark eyes as clearly as if he'd spoken it aloud. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, for this moment, Isabella Cruz was free. Free to return to the ranch that had become her home. Free to explore whatever was growing between her and Nathan. Free to live without looking over her shoulder every moment of every day. Free to discover what it felt like to be innocent in the eyes of the law and treasured in the heart of a good man. As they walked out of the courthouse into the bright Helena sunshine, Nathan's arm around her waist and the future stretching ahead like an open road, Isabella felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. Pure, uncomplicated joy. The truth had set her free. Now it was time to learn how to live in that freedom. But Diego Cruz wasn't finished. He caught up with them at the hotel where Nathan had been staying during the trial. Isabella was packing her few belongings when she heard the commotion in the hallway, angry voices, the sound of boots on wooden floors. Nathan's voice rising in warning. Get away from that door, Cruz, or I'll finish what I started at the ranch. Isabella opened the door to find Diego standing in the hallway, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his perfect composure finally cracked. Behind him stood two men Isabella didn't recognize, hired guns by the look of them. This isn't over, Hermana, Diego snarled. You think a territorial court can protect you? You think this gringo rancher can keep you safe from what's coming? Nathan stepped between them, his hand resting on his gun. The lady's under the protection of the law now. You lost, Diego. Accept it and walk away. The law? Diego laughed, but there was no humor in it. I am the law where I come from. I have connections you can't imagine, resources you can't match. This little victory means nothing. It means everything, Isabella said quietly, stepping beside Nathan. It means the truth matters. It means I'm not afraid of you anymore. Diego's eyes blazed with hatred. You should be, because I know where you live now. I know about your precious ranch, your new life. And I promise you, Isabella, I will destroy it all. Every person who helped you, every place that sheltered you. I will burn it to the ground. No, Nathan said simply. You won't. There was something in his voice, a calm certainty that made even Diego pause. Because you're going to leave Montana territory tonight, and you're never coming back. You can't make me. I can. Nathan's smile was cold as winter steel. See, while you were busy buying witnesses and forging documents, I was doing some investigating of my own. Turns out Maria Vasquez wasn't your only victim. There was a girl in Tucson, another in Santa Fe. And they all have something in common. They all have friends, families, people who care about them. Diego's face went white. You're lying. Am I? Carmen Santos sends her regards, by the way. Took a little convincing, but she finally agreed to tell the truth about what you did to Maria. Amazing what a guilty conscience can do to a person. Nathan's voice dropped to a whisper. She's willing to testify, Diego, in open court, about everything. Isabella's heart leaped. Carmen Santos, Maria's best friend. She'd always known what really happened that night. And then there's Dr. Martinez in Santa Fe, Nathan continued. Seems he kept detailed records of treating a young woman for injuries consistent with violent assault. Injuries inflicted by someone she knew and trusted. Diego's composure was crumbling. Those records are sealed, doctor-patient privilege. Not when the patient is dead and her family wants justice. Nathan stepped closer. You see, Diego, you made one mistake. You thought money could buy everything. But you can't buy a mother's love for her dead daughter. You can't purchase a father's need for justice. Isabella watched her brother's face as the reality sank in. All his careful planning, all his wealth and influence, meant nothing against the simple truth spoken by people who refused to be silenced. So here's what's going to happen, Nathan said conversationally. You're going to leave Montana tonight. You're going to dissolve your business in Arizona and leave the territory. And you're never going to contact Isabella again. Not ever. And if I refuse, Nathan's smile turned predatory. Then Carmen testifies. Dr. Martinez releases his records, and I make sure every newspaper from here to California knows exactly what kind of man Diego Cruz really is. Think your fiancé's family will still want you as a son-in-law when they learn you're a rapist and a thief? Diego's face contorted with rage, but Isabella could see the defeat in his eyes. He'd built his entire life on a foundation of lies and intimidation, and now that foundation was crumbling. This isn't over, he said finally, but the words lacked conviction. Yes, it is, Isabella said quietly. It's been over since the moment I chose to speak the truth instead of living in your shadow. Diego looked at her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost palpable. Then he turned and walked away, his hired guns trailing behind him like well-dressed vultures. Isabella watched him go, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she'd carried for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Is it really over? She asked Nathan. It's really over, he said, pulling her into his arms. He knows he's beaten. Men like Diego only fight when they think they can win. That evening, as their train pulled out of Helena bound for Silver Ridge, Isabella pressed her face to the window and watched the courthouse fade into the distance. In her pocket was a telegraph from Mrs. Chen. Welcome home. Flowers waiting. Home. The word no longer felt foreign on her tongue. 3 weeks later, Isabella Cruz and Nathan Harper were married in the parlor of the Broken Arrow Ranch, surrounded by neighbors who had come to respect the woman who'd faced down lies with nothing but her own courage. Mrs. Chen provided the flowers, the ranch hands served as witnesses, and James Crawford performed the ceremony, having been ordained as a minister in his youth. Isabella never saw Diego again, though word filtered back that he'd lost his engagement when stories about Maria Vasquez finally came to light. He disappeared from Arizona territory shortly thereafter, leaving behind a trail of debts and accusations that would follow him for the rest of his life. The Broken Arrow Ranch prospered under Isabella's careful management. She proved to have a gift for finances that her father had never recognized, and within 5 years the ranch had tripled in size and profitability. More importantly, it became known throughout Montana as a place where travelers in distress could find help. No questions asked. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to their love story came 2 years later, when a young Mexican woman fleeing an abusive marriage found her way to their door during a winter storm. Isabella took her in without hesitation, helped her find work in town, and stood with her when the woman's husband came looking for her with violence in his eyes. Because some debts, Isabella had learned, are paid forward rather than back, and some stories of redemption inspire others to write their own. On quiet evenings, when the ranch work was done and the sun was setting over the mountains, Isabella would sit on the porch with Nathan and marvel at the journey that had brought them together. She traded her pride for shelter, expecting nothing more than survival. Instead, she'd found something infinitely more precious, a love built on respect, trust, and the unshakable belief that truth would always triumph over lies. The scar on Nathan's face had faded over the years, but it remained a reminder of the man he'd been before he learned to fight for what mattered. And Isabella's own scars, invisible, but no less real, had become proof of her strength rather than evidence of her victimhood. Sometimes late at night when the Montana wind whistled through the pines, Isabella would think of Maria Vasquez and all the other women who hadn't been as fortunate as she. But instead of guilt, she felt determination. Their voices had been silenced, but hers had not. Their stories had been buried, but hers lived on. And in living well, in loving deeply, in building something beautiful from the ashes of cruelty, Isabella knew she was honoring their memory in the only way that truly mattered. The frontier could be harsh and unforgiving, but it could also be a place of second chances, of new beginnings, of love that bloomed even in the most unlikely soil. Isabella had learned that survival wasn't just about enduring, it was about choosing to believe in tomorrow, even when today seemed impossible. As the first snows of another winter began to fall, Isabella stood at her bedroom window and watched Nathan moving through his evening chores, their young son toddling beside him with a child's determination to help. She placed a hand on her growing belly, feeling the flutter of new life, and smiled. She traded her pride for shelter and found love beyond her wildest dreams. And if that wasn't a miracle worth believing in, then miracles simply didn't exist. But Isabella knew better. She'd lived through one. What would you have done in Isabella's position? When faced with the choice between pride and survival, between speaking truth and staying safe, between trusting a scarred stranger and facing the storm alone, could you have found the courage to trade everything you thought defined you for a chance at something better? Isabella's story reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is accept help when it's offered, even when every instinct screams that trust is dangerous. She learned that home isn't always where you're born. Sometimes it's where you're chosen, where you're seen for who you truly are, rather than what the world expects you to be. But perhaps the most powerful lesson in Isabella's journey is this: the scars we carry don't have to define us. Nathan's face bore the marks of violence, but he chose to let that pain transform him into a protector rather than a predator. Isabella's invisible wounds from years of abuse and betrayal could have hardened her heart forever, but instead she chose to remain open to love, to hope, to the possibility that not all men were monsters. Their story shows us that healing is possible, that justice can prevail, and that love can bloom even in the frozen ground of broken hearts. It proves that sometimes the people who've been hurt the most are the ones most capable of recognizing genuine kindness when they encounter it. Think about the courage it took for Isabella to testify in that courtroom, to stand before 12 strangers and bare her soul, knowing that her very life hung in the balance. Think about Nathan's decision to risk everything: his ranch, his reputation, his safety, to protect a woman he barely knew. These weren't just acts of bravery. They were acts of faith in the fundamental goodness of humanity. In our modern world, we might not face horse-riding villains or territorial courts, but we all encounter moments when we must choose between self-preservation and doing what's right. We all face times when pride becomes a luxury we can't afford, when trust feels impossible, but is absolutely necessary for survival. Isabella's story teaches us that strength isn't about never needing help. It's about having the wisdom to recognize when help is real and the courage to accept it. It shows us that dignity isn't lost when we bend. It's proven when we refuse to break. And what about the helpers, the Nathan Harpers of this world? Their story reminds us that true strength lies not in dominating others, but in lifting them up. That real masculinity isn't about control or conquest, but about protection and respect. That sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply see someone's worth when the rest of the world refuses to look. Diego's downfall wasn't just about legal justice, it was about the inevitable collapse that comes when a life is built on lies. His wealth, his influence, his carefully constructed reputation all crumbled the moment real truth was spoken by people who refused to be silenced. It's a reminder that while money can buy many things, it cannot purchase integrity, and it cannot silence conscience forever. The frontier was a harsh place, unforgiving to the weak and merciless to the unlucky. But it was also a place of second chances, where people could reinvent themselves, where past mistakes didn't have to define future possibilities. Isabella and Nathan found each other in that wilderness, not despite their scars, but because of them. Their brokenness became the foundation for something beautiful. Their legacy living on through the travelers they helped, the women they sheltered, the hope they offered to those who had lost faith in human kindness shows us that the greatest victories aren't just personal. They ripple outward, creating waves of healing that touch lives we may never know about. As you think about Isabella's journey from desperation to triumph, from fear to love, from surviving to thriving, ask yourself, what would I have traded my pride for? What stranger's kindness might I have rejected out of fear? What second chance am I still too afraid to take? Her story isn't just about the American frontier. It's about the frontiers we all face, the unknown territories of trust, forgiveness, and hope. It's about the courage to believe that tomorrow can be different from yesterday, that love can conquer fear, and that sometimes the best things in life come to those who are brave enough to accept them. If this story touched your heart, if it made you think about courage, redemption, and the power of standing up for what's right, then we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words matter to us and to this community we're building together. And if you believe in stories that show the triumph of truth over lies, love over fear, and hope over despair, then hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because every week we're here with new tales from the frontier of the human heart, stories that remind us who we can be when we choose courage over comfort. Tomorrow we have another incredible story waiting about a former Union soldier who had to choose between his past and his conscience, and the Confederate widow who taught him the true meaning of forgiveness. It's a tale that will challenge everything you think you know about healing and redemption. Until then, remember, sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought with guns or fists, but with the quiet courage to speak truth in a world that profits from lies. Sometimes the strongest people are those who've learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. And sometimes when you're brave enough to trade your pride for shelter, you might just find that what you thought was an ending was actually the beginning of the most beautiful chapter of your life. This has been Wild West Stories, where every scar tells a story, every sunset promises a new dawn, and every ending is just another beginning waiting to unfold.